Does the term bad boy for life still ring true for Sean Combs, aka Diddy? Is he feeling remorseful for his past actions that have him still facing a years-long prison sentence, even though he's been found not guilty on the more serious charges he once faced? Great questions, right? Well, according to new reports, it seems like the Bad Boy Records founder is seeking help while still locked up in a detention center. So is this a self-reckoning, or is it a ploy to look good for the judge?
Diddy's prison nightmare finally crossed the line from fear into brutal reality the moment blood hit the concrete floor of his cell. For weeks, he'd been hearing whispers, feeling eyes on him, sensing that the walls were closing in. But nothing prepared him for the night everything exploded. The attack didn't come with a warning.
According to reports, he signed himself up for self-help therapy programs to address his drug use and violence against women. By this point, we all know Sean Combs was found not guilty of RICO conspiracy and sex trafficking his former girlfriends Cassie and the woman known in his trial as Jane. I saw and heard both these women testify myself, and let's just say some of their testimony, I don't know if I'll be able to get it out of my brain. But maybe what they testified to actually struck a chord with Diddy. According to a report by TMZ, their sources say Sean Combs enrolled himself into a STOP program at MDC Brooklyn. So what's the STOP program? It's a course for inmates with the focus of preventing sexual assault, domestic violence, and dating violence. Oh, and per those same reports, he's reportedly undergoing therapy and in a drug abuse program reportedly conducted by Dr. Harry X. Wexler. Now, during the trial, we heard a lot about drugs: ketamine, cocaine, weed, molly, shrooms, GHB, 2C, or pink cocaine. Federal prosecutors said previously drugs were a key ingredient for the freak-offs or hotel nights or wild king nights, whatever you want to call them. Meanwhile, the defense claimed Sean Combs struggled with drug addiction, and any drug use was just personal and for private use. And we heard a testimony about the rampant drug use too, from Cassie and Jane, where they both claimed they couldn't go through freak-offs or hotel nights without drugs, to the many assistants like Mia or George Kaplan, or even Brendan Paul, where they observed Sean Combs doing drugs. Some even partook in drugs to prove their loyalty, or picked up drugs on Combs' behalf. Or the many of text messages shown about drug costs, reimbursements for drugs, etc. Then another theme that played throughout the trial was the excruciating amount of testimony about domestic violence, especially during Combs' relationship with Cassie. I mean, we all saw the Intercontinental Hotel surveillance tape. We heard the subsequent apology after portions of the footage were released publicly. But we also heard about violence toward Jane, and Combs' former assistant Mia, and Cassie's stylist Deontay, and Cassie's former best friend Carrie Morgan. The defense even owned up to the domestic violence many times during the trial, something even the judge used as part of the reason to keep Combs locked up pending sentencing. The judge said during the bond hearing, at trial the defense conceded defendants' violence in a personal relationship, saying it happened in relation to Cassie Ventura and Jane. Judge Subramanian even pointed out there was violent and illegal conduct even after the HSI raids on his homes, saying that this highlights a disregard for the rule of law and a propensity of violence. But according to the report by TMZ, their source says Combs wants to use their jail programs to better himself. But there are skeptics of Combs' motivation to do the programs now. Is it too little too late, or does this polish him up for the judge so Mark Agnifilo can say in court, "Look, Your Honor, my client did these programs. He wants to be a better man"? I mean, I wouldn't put it past Mark Agnifilo to say that at the upcoming sentencing hearing. He said something along those lines of this when he was making arguments for Sean Combs to get bond after the verdict. Now, Combs reportedly started getting drug treatment before his arrest last year, even though the feds say he was found with drugs in his hotel room the night he was arrested. And Mark Agnifilo previously said Jane helped Diddy get into a batterers program before his ultimate arrest. We'll see if the self-work paid off, or if it's too little too late when Combs is ultimately sentenced in less than 3 months. Well, I'm joined now by trial attorney Adante Pointer. Adante, always great to see you. Is it no longer bad boy for life? What are your thoughts on these courses that Sean Combs is reportedly enrolled in? Are you buying that it's actually making him a better person, or do you think it's just trying to make him look better in front of the judge before sentencing?
Well, I think two things can be true at the same time. One is, yes, those courses are designed, they're instituted, they give inmates, if you will, access to those courses because the belief is those courses will help, a person's behavior and curb them from.
No loud footsteps, no shouted threats, just a sudden, savage burst of violence that turned his cell into a battlefield and shattered whatever illusion of safety he thought he still had left. It started with the sound of metal scraping against metal somewhere down the tier, a sound most inmates ignore, but for him, already on edge, it sent chills ripping down his spine. Before he could even stand up from the edge of his bunk, The cell door slammed behind two inmates who moved with purpose, cold and silent. Their faces weren't angry, they were focused, determined, like men who weren't improvising but carrying out something designed, planned, and approved. Diddy jumped to his feet, hands raised, trying to talk, trying to defuse, trying to use whatever charm or influence he still believed he had. But that world doesn't exist in prison. Status doesn't buy you a second of mercy. One of the inmates rushed him with a sharpened piece of metal, a homemade blade glinting under the dim light. The strike was fast, a blur of rage.
Doing things that would find them in front of a judge. I also could see that serving a dual purpose. Second purpose being it makes you look much better in front of the judge. As I told all my clients, if you're doing things that the court can recognize that is actually helping you deal with the behavior that puts you in front of the judge in the first place. So here, violence against women, domestic violence is something that the courts is a big no-no in society as well as the court. And so I can see the fact that he's taking these classes being something that the judge will take into consideration during his sentencing. And on top of that, the drug class is the same thing. Because I believe, if I was Diddy's attorney and given the way the evidence came in, I'd certainly be like, look, these things happen during dark times where I was in a drug, induced haze to where I was doing and acting in ways that I am ashamed about now. But during that time, it was because drug, sex addiction, and things like that I'm now addressing.
Well, you actually kind of sound like Diddy's defense attorney, Mark Agnifilo, because he literally made essentially the exact same argument, especially during the bond hearing. But I'm curious to know, obviously there are skeptics of this where they think it's strictly just to look good, it's just for good press, all of that stuff. Yeah. But in your opinion, do you think that these courses are just too little too late? I mean, the defense was saying that he was trying to get help before, he was trying to get help to address his drug use previously, that Jane was helping him get into a batterers program. But do you think it's too little too late?
Well, it's too little too late for his victims, okay? But it's not too little too late for the rest of the people he's going to encounter while he continues to live out the rest of his life. And so you can't slam the door on redemption. You can't slam the door on someone trying to address destructive behavior. So I think, he does get some kudos for enrolling in the program and for the efforts he made prior to finding himself in federal court facing all of those charges. So I think it does go to his credit, but you're right. Critics and skeptics, sometimes they'll just never be satisfied. And for, well-founded reasons. When you have someone who has a documented history such as him and you see the videos and you hear the testimony, his problem goes deeper than a 30-day, program. Not that these programs are 30 days, but just to say it's going to take long-term and commitment to the long-term results in order for us to really have confidence that he's not going to engage in such disturbing behavior.
And it's interesting too, because I think the public reaction to this verdict was really kind of split down the middle. I was really thinking it was going to be one way. I was at the courthouse. It was a completely different kind of beast and animal that was going on after the verdict happened. There were people with the baby oil. It was a crazy day after the verdict happened. But I know some analysts were kind of comparing it to the O.J. Simpson verdict, but it seemed like the reaction was really kind of split down the middle. A lot of people upset with the jury's decision, but then there were a lot surprisingly celebrating the verdict. What are your thoughts?
Well, my entire time looking at the case, the charges, and listening, to the evidence as it came in during trial, I thought that depending upon how a person, be it a juror, be it the public, comes into the trial believing how someone who's a victim should act and how they believe relationships.
Rage and precision. He felt the blade tear into him, hot and immediate, sending a jolt of pain that stole the air from his lungs. He stumbled backward into the wall, clutching his side, gasping. The second attacker cornered him, blocking the only exit while the first swung again, this time carving a line across his arm. Blood splattered the bed, the wall, the floor. His own heartbeat pounded in his ears as he tried to shield himself, tried to push back, but the attackers were relentless. In prison, a man bleeding isn't a signal to stop, it's a signal to finish the job. He yelled for the guards, voice cracking, raw, panicked. The attackers didn't care. They shoved him to the ground, kicking him, dragging him. trying to pin him so the blade could hit something vital, and for a moment, it looked like they were going to succeed. His strength faded, his vision blurred, his body gave out under the weight of the blows. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, guards came running, the metal door crashed open and
Ships can evolve or devolve and fall apart is the lens that they would then make their verdict. Why I say that is because if you think a person who's battered, someone who's been a victim, someone who's been assaulted in the ways that were described, most people have an idea as to how they will respond and act towards that, or their expectation if it happened to their loved one, how they'd expect their loved one to act. And in those situations, you don't expect someone to be tweeting, you don't expect somebody to be sending texts telling their abuser that they love them or that they want more of what took place. However, there are other people who are going to who see it from maybe more so the lens of a victim or someone who's been abused, who would say, you know what, that's not so beyond the pale of reason because the abuse has been so entrenched in this person's mind that they then fall in love with their abuser. And so that's not something that they would, look askance upon or look down upon. So, one of the things about being in trial that I always remind my clients, is that despite all the rules that the judge gives people, no one leaves their life experience or their opinions at the courthouse door.
Mm.
It all makes its way into the courtroom and ultimately into the jury room. And that's why you can see such people who are on one side, like celebrating Diddy being acquitted on the much more serious charges, and other people who are like, how did this happen? I am upset. I feel like victims did not get justice today.
Right, exactly. And emotions did run really high, especially when the verdict came down, because I think I myself was pretty surprised at some of the jury's decisions in relation to some of the charges where they found him not guilty. But, obviously they made their decision. They listened to the evidence. They saw all the exhibits and they made the decision that they did. And say come sentencing that Sean Combs is sentenced to maybe a couple years behind bars in prison. But do you think even after this trial, after everything that we've learned, after the many civil lawsuits that were also filed, do you think that there's any type of way that Sean Combs can have a comeback at this point?
Well, I think there's certainly a comeback that could be crafted and created in which we as the public may see. Listen, this is a person who has lived his life in the public light, in the limelight for decades. Okay. And so, as has been said before, fame is one of the more addictive or most addictive drugs known to man. And so he was a very famous and now some might say infamous person. The idea that he allows the narrative to end with the way in which the evidence came in and this kind of mixed bag verdict does not is not what's the word I'm looking for? If I don't see Diddy allowing the last chapter of his book to be written with this trial, instead, the person that he's held himself out to be and who we now understand him to be is someone who is going to say, look, this was a dark chapter in my life, but now I'm going to show you the phoenix rising from the ashes. And there are other chapters. And I think that he will make an even more concerted effort to be more philanthropic, to be more of a victim's advocate. And also, once he completes these programs,
chaos erupted. The attackers were slammed to the ground, tackled, restrained, dragged out screaming threats. Diddy lay there, shaking, bleeding, trying to breathe through the pain while guards yelled for medical. The cell floor was streaked with red. His clothes were torn. His hands wouldn't stop trembling. As they lifted him onto a stretcher, he could barely hold his head up. Other inmates stood pressed against their cell bars, staring at him, some smug, some curious, some whispering about who ordered the hit, who got paid, who would try again. Because inside prison walls, once someone tries to take you out, the danger doesn't disappear, it multiplies. They rushed him to the medical wing where nurses worked fast, stitching, cleaning, bandaging, but even they couldn't hide the look in their eyes. They'd seen men break before. They'd seen the strong collapse after one violent moment changed everything, and now it was happening to him. His body shook uncontrollably, not from the cold, but from the reality hitting him harder than the blade ever could. He wasn't safe.
he could say, look, I was once an abuser of women, abuser of drugs, abuser of fame, abuser of power and fortune, but look who I am now. And so I think that's a pretty powerful story. And frankly, people love comeback stories.
Yeah, they do love a good comeback story, but I'm curious in your opinion, do you think that this is all just for maybe a showmanship, or do you think it's all for PR so that way, Diddy can walk out of MDC Brooklyn or possibly a potential prison and just be like, you know
Right.
what, I am a changed person. But also in that same breath, what kind of message do you think that sends to victims out there who may have been abused or, something had happened to them by a high profile figure? They want to report this to police. They want to either go to maybe a civil lawyer, all of that stuff. But then after this trial, they are like, no, I can't do that. Look what happened in this case. What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
Well, there are definitely people who are victims advocates and victims themselves who think that this trial serves to kind of throw cold water, if you will, and chill victims who might want to come forward to to express what happened to them, to initiate a criminal case, to initiate a civil case. They look at this case and say, at what cost is it to me personally to have to bare my soul to only then be grilled on cross examination, to have all of my intimate details bantied about, in the media, and then to be judged and then go through all of that. And I walk away in some ways empty handed. Now, that's certainly one way of looking at things. And there's a lot of credibility as it relates to understanding how someone could feel that way. The flip side, because remember, the scales of justice isn't just one side, there's two sides. The other side, if you will, is at what point in time does a person pay in full their price to society? And then once they've paid the price for their transgressions, at what point do you then look at that person and feel like, hey, you could be a changed person. You can redeem yourself. There's things that you can do to essentially prove to us as members of the public, as clients, as customers, that you know what, you're a changed man. And so that's the hill Diddy has to climb. Whether he climbs that hill or not remains to be seen, but it's definitely a hill that's in front of him. And some might say it's not a hill, it's a mountain.
It is a mountain for Diddy. I think it might honestly be Mount Everest. It's a large mountain for him to scale, for I think people to possibly forget in their conscious what we learned in this trial. And I remember when Sean Combs, we've been covering this since Cassie's lawsuit, since 2023, November of that year. And I just remember thinking that there would be some type of reckoning within the hip hop community, the Black community, as far as Me Too goes, something kind of similar. And I thought, possibly, and I think maybe other people thought so too, that maybe Sean Combs was kind of that person that would, bring about this kind of reckoning in the hip hop community as far as Me Too goes. But do you think that can still happen? Do you think that will still happen?
Well, I think that Diddy's trial, served as a clarion call, a wake up call, canary in the mine, so to speak, as it relates to you could be as powerful, as popular, as wealthy as Diddy. I mean, keep in mind, he called himself Brother Love. He got the key to New York City in
Yeah.
the months or the year leading up to all of this, right?
Yeah.
And he was sitting on what some might say is the highest pedestal. And look how far he has fallen.
Hmm.
Now, at the same time,
Not today, not tomorrow, maybe not ever. His lawyers were notified. The prison immediately filed an internal report, but none of that meant anything to him lying under those harsh fluorescent lights, staring at the ceiling while the pain pulsed through his ribs. Every noise made him flinch, every footstep made him panic. He kept asking one question over and over: who sent them? No one could answer. Some said the attackers were gang affiliated, others said they were paid off. Some claimed it was personal, others believed it was a warning. But the most dangerous rumor, the one spreading through the prison like wildfire, was that the hit hadn't been the final move. It was the first one. Back in the general population units, inmates were already talking, planning, laughing. The stabbing wasn't a secret. It was entertainment, a power shift, a message, and now everyone wanted a piece of him, either to finish the job or to cash in on the chaos. It started like any other night, quiet and
for why Sean Combs, should be released on bail pending sentencing, acquitted of the most serious charges. There's no comparable case of someone who is convicted of the Mann Act alone and not engaging in sex trafficking or a prostitution for financial gain, and they would be locked up like this. Talked about the issues plaguing the MDC, how it is dangerous, how he's not a risk of flight, not a danger to the community. But do you think Judge Arun Subramanian is going to be persuaded by your letter, by your motion, because obviously he specifically highlighted after the verdict your client's violence, how the defense asserted at trial that Combs was violent? Do you think he's going to have a change of opinion now based upon the legal papers?
Well, I think we certainly hope so. And, as we pointed out in the papers, the unfortunate violence that occurred was mostly a really long time ago, other than the one incident in June that Jane testified to, which was kind of unusual. I mean, they had been together for 3 years. There had been no violence, and she essentially started the fight. I'm not excusing anything, but it was kind of a one-off. And I think the government really hadn't put in any evidence of any recent violence. The Intercontinental video, remember, that was almost 10 years ago. He broke up with Cassie in 2018. And in our reply papers yesterday, we submitted a letter from Gina Hyun, who was one of the alleged victims, a different ex-girlfriend. And I think it was a pretty powerful letter about how Sean has changed, how she's not concerned about violence. She thinks he should be released on bail. So we're hoping that that will persuade the judge, given everything else, particularly, as you noted, like the really, really unusual nature of this particular Mann Act conviction and the fact that he's already been in prison, or jail rather, for like 11 months. This case is a one-off to begin with, but we're not aware of any case like this with a Mann Act conviction where anyone's done that much time to begin with. So.
And prosecutors, I'm imagining, have come back or will come back and say, well, listen, look, after the raids on his property, he engaged, or what they would say, he allegedly engaged in criminal activity and, obviously violence, they say, with Jane. But they say, look, what was in his hotel room when he was picked up in New York. They made allegations of what he was trying to do while he was in the MDC, whether it was using other inmates' phone privileges to have three-way phone calls. That was litigated before trial. What would be your response to say, you make the point that he is a changed person. The violence that was shown during the course of this trial is from years ago. But how would you convince the judge to say, listen, we are being truthful, we are being honest, we are being forefront, that he really is a different human being? Because the judge, again, this was right after the verdict and didn't have an opportunity for a briefing schedule. How can you make the argument that he is different and that he should be trusted?
Well, I mean, I think, the point you mentioned about the arrest, I mean, unfortunately, Sean has struggled with drug addiction for a long time. And I think one of the good things and positive things that has come out of his incarceration is given him an opportunity, to rehabilitate. He's committed to continuing that. He's committed to a long-term program of therapy and helping with the domestic violence problem that he's had in the past. So, at a certain point, you have to just maybe it is a leap of faith, but you have to just give a person another chance. And he really is committed to change and to there being a new chapter of service on his part. So
heavy, he sat on the edge of his bunk, trying to force sleep that never came. He could feel something was off. The silence felt wrong, too controlled, like the whole tier was holding its breath. Then the sound came, footsteps that didn't match the usual evening shift, slow, intentional, stalking. Before he even had time to stand, the cell door slammed open and two inmates burst in with the kind of cold focus that only comes from a planned attack. No yelling, no warning, just pure violence from the second they crossed the threshold. One of them held a makeshift blade, sharp, jagged, wrapped with cloth around the handle, a weapon designed for one thing, damage. The other stood in the doorway, blocking any chance of escape. Diddy backed up instantly, hands raised, voice scrambling for reason. But inside prison, reason means nothing, power means everything, and tonight, he had none. The first blow came fast, a slash across his side that tore through his shirt and split skin open in a burning streak. He screamed, stumbled back, clutching the wound.
I think we have to hope that the judge will agree with that, and I think we've made a strong case for that.
Do you know when the judge might make a decision on bail?
We don't know.
Okay. If he denies release again, does that give you a sense of what sentencing could be like? Now, to be clear, my understanding is Judge Arun Subramanian even said at the point, if I make a decision on release, it's not indicative of where I'm leaning towards sentencing. I know there's a pre-sentencing investigation still being conducted or has been conducted. There's a lot of factors to consider. But I have to ask about whether this is going to, have an effect on sentencing. Do you believe it's going to have an effect on sentencing? Does it give you a preview of where the judge is lining up? Because my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, you are probably going to be arguing for time served, maybe a minimum of 21 to 27 months. Where do you think the judge is going to go here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to take each step at a time, and that the judge is not going to prejudge that. There's a lot more information he needs to get, not only the pre-sentence report, but we're going to make a very fulsome sentencing submission, and he's going to have, a much more detailed picture. Even, the trial was about the charges, right? And he doesn't have the full picture of all the factors about Sean's life that he's going to consider. There's going to be a big fight about the sentencing guidelines. We think actually we're going to end up arguing for an even lower guideline range than we had originally believed at the time of the verdict, where we didn't have we had like a couple of hours to try to figure out what to say about bail. So, I hope the judge will grant bail, but I feel confident that even if he doesn't, it doesn't necessarily mean he's not going to sentence Sean to time served. He's going to take everything into account when he gets all the submissions. And, I've got a lot of confidence that the judge is going to be fair and not prejudge the situation.
And you also have this motion for judgment of acquittal, that the Mann Act convictions should be tossed out, Combs be granted at a minimum a new trial. Number of very interesting arguments that are present, and it's basically that there has really never been, as we talked about, a prosecution conviction on a Mann Act like this, that Combs wasn't profiting off of the business. There were all consenting adults that were involved. The jury didn't find that there was any sex trafficking, that this isn't even prostitution per se, it's more voyeurism, that the intent wasn't for people to travel for sex for money, but paid them for their time. They were all having a good time. There's a First Amendment argument that the freak-offs and the hotel nights were performances that were videotaped so he could watch them later. It's amateur pornography. There's an argument that he was prejudiced because of all the other evidence that came in to prove RICO or sex trafficking, but would never have come in if this was merely a prosecution for the Mann Act violations. Specifically, we talk about the Intercontinental Hotel footage. But couldn't the counter argument be, if you look at the text messages and voice notes and the travel, hotel, the payment documentation, that these charges, the Mann Act charges, could have been proven based on that evidence alone and not anything else about racketeering or sex trafficking?
Well, I think that goes, I don't agree with that. I think that, as we argued in the papers, the government didn't really show that the purpose of the travel was to have sex for money, and that in fact all the testimony and a lot of the other evidence showed that the men were being paid for their time. But even if we were wrong about that one, we have a number of the other arguments.
His blood started to drip down his ribs. The attackers didn't stop. They didn't hesitate. Another strike came, this one aimed for his chest, missing by inches as he turned and crashed into the metal bunk. He tried to fight back, instinct, adrenaline, survival, all kicking in at once. But 2 against 1 in a tiny cell, with one holding a weapon, he didn't stand a chance. They shoved him to the floor, kicking him, pinning him down as the blade swung again and again. He could feel the heat of the cuts, the sting of the metal, the weight of their bodies trying to keep him still long enough to finish what they came to do. He shouted for the guards, voice cracking with panic, but the guards didn't come right away. They never do. Noise inside a prison isn't rare, violence isn't rare, screaming isn't rare. And for a terrifying moment, he realized he might bleed out right there on the cold cell floor with no one to save him. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only seconds, the alarm went off. Guards came running, keys clanking, radios blaring orders. The attackers tried to get in a few last strikes, but the guards tackled them, slamming them against the wall, dragging them out of the cell in handcuffs as they still shouted threats. Diddy stayed on the floor, shaking, gasping, gripping his bleeding side. The cell was a mess, blood on the sheets, Blood on the wall, blood on the floor. His breathing was sharp and uneven, a man realizing he was inches from a much darker ending. When medical staff rushed in, they found him trembling so hard he could barely stand. His face was pale, his shirt soaked, his hands unsteady as he tried to speak. They didn't waste time. By the time he was transferred to a temporary protective unit, the shock had turned into full-blown terror. His breathing came in short, shallow bursts. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. His voice cracked every time he tried to speak. The guards walking him through the hallway noticed it. The inmates watching from the upper tiers noticed it. Everyone noticed it. For the first time since entering prison, the mogul wasn't just fallen. He wasn't just vulnerable. He wasn't just broken. He was scared. And fear in prison is like blood in the water. Every decision from this point on, every legal move, every transfer request, every plea for help, is happening because he knows the truth. This wasn't a one-time attack. Someone wants him gone. Someone wants him silenced. Someone wants him erased. And after tonight, after the blade, after the chaos, after the screams, he knows something he never wanted to believe. Prison isn't his punishment. It's his battlefield. And the war has just begun. If you want this expanded to 20K characters or want a darker part 2, say the word.